Our guest today is one of Illinois' favorite sons and one of the first citizens of Chicago, no matter where he hangs his hat. He is an accomplished business leader who is a real credit to our community. We are all so proud of him. Our guest today has distinguished himself as a businessman, both locally and nationally. He served our country with great distinction as the United States Secretary of Commerce. He put together all the necessary elements to pass the North American Free Trade Agreement, an incredible accomplishment. Our guest today is the president of SBC Communications. There is an old-fashioned word which is so appropriate in describing our guest today. That word is loyalty. He has always helped me, I can tell you that. It is his hallmark characteristic. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the City Club of Chicago, Bill Daley. Bill?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jay. Thank you. Thanks very much, Jay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jay, for those very kind words and your friendship. This club is a great institution. It's had a illustrious history of not only memberships but speakers, and it is an honor for me to speak before the club and to see such a august group of people. Let me acknowledge the members of the ICC who are here. I know Jay introduced each one of them, to the members of the legislature and the city council and the business leaders who are here. So seeing so many people that I've known for so long, to be frank with you, in all sorts of different iterations, some in politics, some in business, some in some charitable events, it is great to see so many friends. And to hear, as Jay introduced them, their background. Sharon Gilliam serving 5 mayors. I only had the pleasure of serving 2 of them, but they were pretty important to me. And I think pretty important to the city of Chicago. To my colleagues from SBC, let me thank them for being here, and again, thank each of you for being here at this event. I do hope, Jay mentioned that this will be broadcast on cable, I think 10 o'clock tomorrow night? No? Whenever it is, I really hope you have something better to do than to be watching this, to be frank with you. Saturday, and I'm sure you will hopefully have something better to do. But it's great to be back in Chicago at this important time of the year before an election, and when the Bears are once again struggling mightily to get it together. It's good to be back at a time when sailboats are being moored for the winter, when the air is bracing, and you obviously cannot turn the TV on without seeing a lot of mudslinging and campaigns. That is one part of the political business, quite frankly, that I really don't miss. But as each of you may know, and as many people know from other parts of the country, those negative ads are no longer limited to politics and politicians anymore. They've become part of what is called the ongoing telecom wars. Maybe you've seen the ads where AT&T and their group attacks us, and we respond, and others respond, and back and forth, and all of us appeal to the FCC or the ICC for whatever relief we may want or hope for. It is a veritable alphabet soup of strife and discord. And none of this, quite frankly, serves the interest of the consumers, which is what our industry is supposed to be all about. Let me suggest today that it doesn't, in my opinion, it truly does not have to be, nor should it be, this way. You know, it wasn't long ago that we in Chicago were subject to a spectacle known as council wars. Our leaders were engaged in discord and finger-pointing over the smallest and at times seemingly meaningless of issues. And while the politicians fought, the city and our people suffered. The common challenges that the city faced were left unaddressed. And thankfully, those days are behind us, and the city has benefited from the peace and the progress that has therefore followed. Well, the telecom wars have gone on longer than the council wars. Ever since the 1996 Federal Telecom Act was passed, meanwhile, the telecom industry, as we see day in and day out, has suffered greatly. For any of you who've invested in telecom companies, I don't have to tell you what a terrible time of turmoil this is. At times, it is even heartache for many of our investors. Some of the biggest corporate meltdowns of the past year have involved telecom companies, whether it's WorldCom, Global Crossing, Quest, so many others. Companies which were in the 90s were considered the hot, exciting, dynamic, innovative sort of companies to be with, not the boring, stodgy, conservative Arbox. All of these companies were the companies that everyone envied in the 90s, and today seemingly are struggling mightily. And I'm sure that many of you read about our unfortunate announcement of last month. Due to economic circumstances, we were forced to lay off 11,000 of our colleagues at SBC, including more than 700 right here in Illinois. Some of this is obviously due to the national recession and the difficulties in our economy and the global economy. Some is due to the overcapacity that the booming 90s brought to our industry. But our industry, in my opinion, is also facing another challenge, and that relates to how we are regulated. Telecommunications may have been relatively easy for regulators to regulate and policymakers to develop the policy in which the telecom industry was regulated for the first 100 years. But now it's changing at lightning speed. These changes are making it almost impossible for policymakers to stay ahead of this curve. Consequently, we find ourselves spending a great deal of time and energy fighting yesterday's battles instead of focusing on the issues that face us all today and will face us tomorrow. Now, I'm not blaming those who are struggling to implement these policies in no way, shape, or form, as am I. I think the state commissions and obviously the FCC and all of the state commissions have responsibility for regulating our industry. And they have some of the toughest jobs right now because of the turmoil in our industries. The regulators that I know are motivated, no question about it, as are their policymakers in the legislatures, are motivated to do the right thing, which is to protect the public while telecom transitions to a very different market economy. Let's face it, this is an incredibly complex industry, one, quite frankly, that I didn't appreciate until I got in the middle of it the last 10 months. Just think about it, how we take for granted the fact when you pick up that phone, within milliseconds or seconds, you're connected not only across town, but possibly across the globe in an incredibly complex way. But we take it for granted. And it is amazing the success that all of our companies, whether they're local companies, whether they're long-distance companies, the level of service which we all give to the consumers. Regulators are trying their best to implement existing laws while at the same time trying to anticipate where we in the industry are going and therefore how the consumers that they're also obligated to protect are affected by these enormous changes that the industry is doing. We sympathize with public policymakers who are trying to oversee this industry because it's impossible to keep all of us happy. We're in an industry where we all ask regulators to do certain things while other interested parties within the industry or outside the industry are asking for the exact opposite. I know that regulators in Illinois and elsewhere are generally trying to find the right balance to ensure that the public is served, the consumer is served, and also that our companies stay strong for the economic viability of the state, of which they are also obligated to look out for. We at SBC understand that our industry will always be regulated, and that comes with the territory when you provide a social necessity like the means that means communications for people. Consequently, we know that we must work in partnership with our colleagues at the state and federal level to ensure that the public interest is being served while our company strives to grow and flourish in a very dynamic and at times volatile economy. We have just witnessed, or in some cases participated in an explosive industry boom and a very explosive industry bust. This economic roller coaster affected every company and consumers in very direct and at times very painful ways. Even though we're still dusting ourselves off and finding our footing, one fact, in my opinion, is absolutely clear. And that is consumers are better off today than they were several years ago. Prices have decreased, choices are more prevalent, and technology is more accessible than ever before. Here in Illinois, our competitors are serving nearly a quarter of the local service market, according to the FCC's numbers of last year. Clearly, our world is changing, and we accept that, as we must. We believe that regulation must reflect the monumental changes that are taking place in this new world of communications, not just telecommunications, a world in which mobile phones are as common as calculators, and most people have at least one email address. Put simply, our industry is still being governed by laws that are being outpaced and challenged by the marketplace. And it doesn't take a former Secretary of Commerce to be so bright and figure that out. The fact is that we're all struggling in this new world together. The industry, the regulators, and the consumers. At SBC, we're moving from a monopoly to a competitive business. And it's not always easy for us, no doubt about it. You come from an old world and you begin to change. Some of us who remembered when there was one party running everything around, it was difficult as we went through those changes. But you have to accept it. And those who don't usually lost their elections. But the implications of this new world extend far beyond a few large companies. Telecom suppliers who have been a font of technological change with great benefits to our national economy and even our national security. These suppliers have been engines of growth, engines of innovativeness and research, and also the engine of job creation. Companies like Telabs right here, and of course the Lucents and Nortels, Siemens, and so many other suppliers, they have been the ones who have done the research and the development of new technologies, and they're hurting and hurting mightily. But as companies like ours have been forced to reduce our capital expenditures, these suppliers have suffered also, with grave consequences for their workers and also for our nation's future technology needs and also for our nation's economy. This is but one ramification of a telecom industry which, in my opinion, is in deep crisis. It should be obvious to anyone who works or may hold stock in the telecommunications-related company that the world of communications has changed and there is no way to stop it and there's no way going back. The Federal Communications Commission is examining this closely. There's a growing recognition that government rules and regulations must reflect and respond to this changing environment. As we know, the FCC is conducting its triennial review based upon the 96 Act, and we hope and expect to see changes occur under Chairman Powell's leadership. I mentioned earlier today that the telecom industry is governed largely by the Telecommunications Act of 1996. A central tenet of that law is that the regional bell operating companies, such as SBC Ameritech, are prohibited from providing long-distance service until demonstrating to regulators that the local markets are open to our competitors. While SBC has been granted authority to sell long-distance service in a number of our states, we are still prevented from providing that service to Ameritech consumers. All the while, consumers have been tapping local telecom service provided by competing companies, reselling our service, not to mention using their mobile phones and their email for local communications. The market is working, and consumers are reaping the benefits, except in our opinion for lower prices and long-distance competition. This is where, in our opinion, the 1996 Act has been outmoded, and regulators charged with enforcing it have been challenged by the forces of the marketplace. When Congress decided to require the regional bells to open local markets as a precondition to offering long distance, it was envisioning an apples-to-apples competition. And by that I mean that consumers would be able to choose between our version of local telephone service and others, identical forms of local telephone service. Today, no one can deny that both business and residential consumers have a choice for local phone service. The consumers, the average person out there will tell you that, and you will see it in surveys if you do them. Some of those services resemble our services. But what Congress didn't foresee, and they were not alone, is that consumers would end up with a wide range of technologies that provide local communications, not just a wide range of providers offering identical technologies. For example, I doubt too many people foresaw that wireless telephones would become so pervasive so quickly and so affordable that a significant number of consumers, and I tell you, you don't have to turn your phones off. Please don't. In today's world, we love to hear phones ring. Okay? We wish they would ring more often. And I wish I was technically able to shut this gosh darn thing off. But I have, but not for long. Obviously, none of us would have foreseen the explosion in the wireless business. And so affordable that such a significant number of consumers regularly substitute their wireless phone for their land-based phone, or that in a generational shift that young people today will go to the wireless and never even think about a wireline phone. But that's happened, and we have to accept it. It is change, and we all must accept it. Would anyone have guessed that in 1996, that today, AT&T would be the largest cable company in the country, and also selling local telephone service over those cable wires? No, but it is happening right here in Chicago. When writing the Telecommunications Act, it's understandable that Congress gave little consideration to how data services, such as email, would displace voice communications. I mean, who would have thought that people would opt to send emails, not only across the country or across the world, but across a room like this? Yet consumers have choices and competition exists. And a second and related example of how the realities of the marketplace have outstripped the 1996 law. It's the requirement that companies that own, maintain, and operate the telecommunications infrastructure lease all or parts of that network to competing carriers at dramatically discounted prices. This policy is called, and forgive me for the jargon, but the telecommunications industry has more jargon and acronyms than the federal government. That is the Unbundled Network Element Platform, better known to you experts as UNIP. For the sake of simplicity, I'll talk about this in the context of really what it is, and that is wholesale prices paid to us by other companies for the right to lease parts or all of our network. It's important to understand that these wholesale prices are unrelated to the resale prices that are paid by the consumers. The wholesale prices vary state by state, but the resale charges, when long distance was split off, those subsidies were provided by business customers. Now, as our competitors target those high-end users and take the revenues which they provide, they threaten the ability to serve everyone else. Our costs haven't changed, but our revenue base is dramatically and quickly changed. Universal service is an admirable social goal, and we're proud to be the ones who provide that, as we have from the very beginning of our company. But today we are a business operating in a very different system, a very competitive system, and this is where we need help from the policymakers and the regulators. In our opinion, it is simply unfair and untenable for this cherry picking to continue. If you're going to compete to provide local service, you ought to compete fairly and you ought to compete equally. You ought to compete against the businesses and the high-end customers, and therefore not leaving us only to provide customers who may need subsidies. You may say that makes perfect business sense, that people would cherry pick this way. And it does, except the price of this cherry picking ultimately will be paid by all of us. Policymakers have determined correctly that all consumers should have access to local phone service, from the high-powered business executive to grandma down on the farm. As we are the provider of last resort, we have the responsibility to provide that universal service, and we take it seriously. But for years, the basic service to But for years, basic service to low-volume phone customers was subsidized, as I mentioned, by long-distance prices. When policymakers conceived the idea of this network leasing, they relied on three assumptions that have not materialized. UNEP was originally adapted as a short-term effort to help companies surmount the barriers to providing competitive local service. Regulators intended that our carriers would lease pieces of our network to get started, and that was fine with us, but they assumed that only small companies, startups, would lease the entire network, and then only for a transitional period while they got their competitive sea legs. But what has happened is that large companies have leased it all and without limit. Today, the two companies that are primary users of this wholesale service are AT&T and WorldCom. You can say a lot of things about both companies, but neither is exactly a small newcomer to the industry. AT&T, as we know, is a great company. It is the phone company. It was the phone company. It is the oldest telecommunications company in our country. Its stock symbol is T. That tells you where they've come from. Obviously, AT&T has had the resources to invest in the network. Company chose instead, which was their right and a perfect vision by their leadership, to expend hundreds of billions of dollars on cable companies, wireless companies, internet companies, and many other ventures. As for WorldCom, it's increasingly clear that that company was not operating under the usual rules and standards of the rest of us. Unfortunately, its workers, its shareholders, and our entire industry is paying the price for the actions of the leadership of that company. The second assumption behind this regulatory approach was that this discounted network leasing would be a temporary tool for these new companies to use while they built their own facilities. In fact, the very goal of the '96 Act was to foster investment in facilities-based competition. But the fact is, neither of these two major competitors today are showing any sign of building their own networks. You can't really blame either one of them. Why invest in facilities when you can simply lease and resell from the existing one? But we all lose when companies that rely on existing network infrastructure are permitted to extract a profit without investing in the network or in the personnel who must maintain it. The fact is that SBC has 23,000 employees in Illinois and just as many retirees, many of them highly trained, well-paid union workers. We are losing revenue on every line that we lease at discounted prices to our competitors. At a time of recession and severe stress in the telecom industry, this has contributed to the layoff of hundreds of our valued employees. The irony is that our competitors rely on those very same workers to take care of this network because they don't have the technicians to send out over to our network problems. Only at times, seemingly telemarketers to do their service. If their service goes down, we get the call. If a storm hits Palatine and it's our workers who go out to restore service. If a line is severed in Blue Island or Rogers Park or in Woodlawn, we respond. We need to maintain these jobs in order to maintain the network that all of us rely on. Replacing skilled union workers with low-paid telemarketers is no recipe for economic success in Illinois, and that's a real consequence of telecommunication law. There's another consequence of this policy that, in our opinion, are affecting millions of consumers. Companies relying on wholesale service are marketing primarily, if not exclusively, to the high-end customer, as I mentioned, and therefore cherry-picking the best customers who were there to subsidize, basically, the low-rate payers. This is creating a crisis, will create a crisis, in our opinion, in the policy that has been on the books for so long in telecommunications, and that is, in essence, the rates are kept low at the bottom for rate payers, and they're subsidized by the high end. Don't get me wrong at all about wholesale business. We want and expect and look forward to a healthier wholesale business. Our wholesale customers are important to us. It is a business that we have no problem with, as long, in our opinion, as the price is fair. We also must realize that the reselling of wireline service is not the only form of local competition. This just isn't about RBOX or CLEX anymore. For those who don't speak the lingo, these are the traditional, in the last 6.5 years at least, traditional phone providers. And that's the third and most faulty assumption behind current telecom laws. that traditional wireline telephony would be the only method of providing alternative communication services for the local market. This was a dramatic miscalculation on the part of policymakers. It overlooked how quickly other types of service, such as wireless and email, would become part of our daily lives. Just think about it. When you leave here today, how many of you will call your office using a mobile phone? When you get back to the office, you'll check your email. How likely are you to have an email message from people across town? Not all that many years ago, you would have walked out of here, you would have gone to a payphone, you would have put in a quarter, you would have called the office, you would have gotten your messages, and you would have made more calls to return those messages. Remember those old payphones. You would return, as I say, each of those messages by phone. Back then, it's likely that all those services would have been provided by Illinois Bell or Ameritech. That clearly is not the case today and will never be the case again. The world has changed, and we recognize that. In their attack ads, our competitors claim that we want to return to the days of the big, bad monopoly days. That's simply not going to happen, nor do we at SBC want it to happen. With all the competition in wireline services and across other types of platforms, it's impossible to put that genie back in the bottle. Let's be frank, our competitors have their own motives for making these charges. They're making money, defending low wholesale prices for local service while keeping us out a long distance serves their bottom line. We have no problem with that. We understand it. But let's understand it for what it is. But what's good for the resellers isn't necessarily always good for consumers or for the economic future of Illinois. Like undermining our ability to maintain and upgrade the network, like displacing well-trained union workers with low-paying telemarketing jobs, like threatening universal service for all telephone users by cherry-picking high-end users who subsidize the rest. Let's be clear, telecommunications will always be regulated, and we understand that. So this is not an issue of whether or not our industry should be regulated. It's an issue, obviously, of how we should be regulated. We're simply suggesting that regulation should better reflect the real world than fomenting endless arguments over telecom systems which are in crisis. I say it's time to end the telecom wars. Let's stipulate that all of us want to make a profit. After all, that's why we're in business. But let's also stipulate that consumers and policymakers, regulators, have an enormous stake in a healthy telecom sector that serves everyone at competitive prices. It serves none of our interests to see this vital part of our economy run into the ground. But that's what we have today, a telecommunications sector which is truly in meltdown. The conflicts inherent in the Telecom Act of '96 are coming to the fore. The recession and current economic conditions are sharpening those issues. Yes, there are plenty of competing goals, competing legitimate goals, and competing legitimate interests. That's why we need to work together to work out these solutions with industry, regulators, consumers all together. And relying on the framework of the past simply is not going to get the job done or prepare us for the future. We all need to work for a regulatory structure that reflects the exciting new world of telecommunications. There is a great opportunity for us, for the industry, for the consumers, for local, for national economy. If we can come together in the spirit of respect and cooperation, we will and we can seize this historic opportunity. But if we fail and we are left to stay in this telecom war, there will be no winners. We will all be losers. I thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity, as I mentioned, for the City Club that they gave me today. I would open it up to questions. I know there's a microphone in the middle. It's the usual procedure for the club. So if you would please, if you ask your questions, identify yourself and who you're with, and then ask your question. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, we should applaud. Hi, Kathy Posner, Chairman of the Executive Committee of City Club. How can you expect customer loyalty in cell phones when every day the rules change of what you're going to be giving customers? Where you will give us a deal, say, give us, commit yourself to 2 years and we'll give you this fabulous deal. And then the next day you're coming out with another deal that's better, and yet I'm already stuck with you for 2 years. How can you change that so I'll feel loyal to a cell phone company and not constantly want to switch around?
Well, it's the downside of a competitive business that's incredibly competitive today. People are seeing lots of churn, and they're trying to come up with a product just about every hour that will slow that down. And so you have a most competitive industry that's under tremendous pressure right now for revenue, in the wireless field at least. And so you've got lots of ideas being thrown out, and people are trying to respond to the marketplace. And when someone comes out with a product that is better than yours, and even though you may have had a different one a month ago, you've got to respond. And that's
Then why is
the
I,
downside
as a
of it.
consumer, then not be able to take advantage of whatever the new thing is instead of being stuck for a year or 2 years and then having resentment toward
Well,
the telephone company?
I would
Yeah.
like that you not have resentment towards us.
Yeah.
No,
No, I'm not resentful toward you
I know.
guys at all. I'm
I
just
know.
pointing
but
out
I
whatever
think that
company
is
it
a
is. Yeah.
problem. We also, consumers be wary. I mean, they've signed contracts and they look at agreements, and people have to understand the nature of what they're signing up for. And companies that try to lock in, when you're making investments, you obviously try to get a return on your investment. And how do you do that? You have to do it over a longer period. If everybody's changing their cell phone or their wireline phone every month, all of us who are hurt by this churn are put in a worse shape, to be frank with you.
No, I love Ameritech, though. I want to make sure. I wasn't
Good.
trying to be confrontational.
Thanks for putting that. Yes, sir.
Mr. Daley, my name is Andrew Hyman. I'm in the Energy and Utility Group at PricewaterhouseCoopers, but I'm express my own views now. I'd like to ask a question about how your company has changed. A few years ago, when I was in graduate school, I moved around town, and at the end of August, and I tried to get a new phone service, and the phone company said, well, we can't get you for line for a while, Mr. Hyman. There seems to be a tremendous spike in demand, and we don't have enough installers. Something happened this month. Well, I was moving in Champaign-Urbana, where there were 40,000 people moving into town, and I was surprised that they hadn't looked at that pattern every year to really provide enough installers. And maybe how has your company changed? And also, on the competitive angle, would it make more sense for you to get out of the local business, be an infrastructure provider, allowing everyone else to pay them to use your lines, and then use that to convince the regulators that you've opened up, and now you can go into the long-distance business? Be just a distribution company and not actually provide the service.
Well, we're proud of the fact that we maintain the network, we provide the network, and then we distribute it. There are those who advocate what is in essence structural separation, which is what you're talking about. We have enormous problems with that for a whole host of reasons. We don't think the consumers would benefit from that. First of all, obviously, we don't believe our company would benefit by that change. There are many who honestly believe that's the only answer to this. It is a difficult question. We are at times viewed as a quasi-government body, at least we were when we were the monopoly. That's changed. So I think we would fight that mightily, and we have in certain states, and when it's been brought up in legislative bodies, because we don't think the consumers benefit, and we won't. As far as the problem, I would hope that for the incoming class this last September in Champaign, that they would not have been having problems with installers. But we try to respond to the demand needs. Quite frankly, there's seasonal, and the opposite happens come the spring when kids leave school. That's sort of an example of if that was the case a few years ago. No doubt about it, our company had enormous problems in the service area a few years ago. I mean, nobody knows better than the consumers of Illinois how difficult it was. And no one knows better than our company the cost in man hours, women hours, and workers, and in expenses for us to correct a very bad situation. We have corrected that, and we feel much better about the service levels that our company is performing at today. Yes, sir.
Hi, Bill. Joel Cohen, City Club member and CEO, Richard Hoffman Corporation. I have trouble turning off my cell phone also, so I'd like to change the topic. I think you're to be congratulated during the last national election in terms of really taking the high road during that troubled period. I was wondering what your insights might be looking towards 2004, and what role you might play in
I'll play
national
no role,
politics.
to be frank with you. I haven't been back to Florida either since 2000. You know, it's anybody's guess, to be honest with you, Joel. I think there's too much to happen between 2004. The president is obviously very strong. Democrats will have 5 or 6 candidates that will aggressively fight for it. You know, it's just who can guess in this business anymore what's going to happen 2 years from now? So I wouldn't want to guess, but I will be a active participant as a voter, and beyond that, I think I'll probably leave it alone. That last one was enough.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Kaplan. I'm
Yeah,
an
Bonnie.
executive producer of talk shows, SBC stockholder, too. Hope your mom's doing good.
Thank you.
My question is, in those Florida wee hours of the morning, I just was curious if there's a story or something that was said to you by Al Gore and you've never told anyone else before, and you'll tell us, and we won't tell anybody.
Yeah. Yeah, there were lots, but I won't tell you.
Just one little
He was
something?
disappointed when the court ruled.
That's a hard act to follow. Stay
Yeah.
on.
So was that one in 2000.
Jeff Berkowitz, head of JB Consulting Group and host and producer of Public Affairs, airing every Monday night at 8:30 on Channel 21. Sirens go. Trying to get this to work. You mentioned, getting back to business, you mentioned several times during your talk the importance of universal service. Many people understand that concept to be basically cross-subsidization. That is, if there are high-cost users somewhere who can't afford the service, universal service says somehow they'll be served by somebody who subsidizes that at a lower rate. That's usually consistent not with competition, but with a monopoly. As you've acknowledged, the industry is quite competitive now. You're competitive. Is there a better way, if you want to assist high-cost users, than the concept of universal service? Perhaps something like phone vouchers?
I think you can test different ideas, but I firmly believe that this is a policy. As a policy, I don't think there's any question that somebody has to be responsible anytime, anywhere, all the time to provide communication services. I don't think you can fool with that, quite frankly. But it is putting an enormous change. Now, you know, some people would say the way you correct this is you raise all the rates and get more balance to it, because for all those years, the long distance business subsidized all the local, basically. That's where all the profit was of AT&T as the monopoly, and everybody understood that. But the world's changed and changed radically and quickly. But we are, as a company, and I am personally someone who believes that should not be fooled with.
Thank you.
Hi, I am apparently third in the line of hosts and producers. My name is Sharice Witherspoon. I'm host and producer of Business Building Business, which airs on WGCI AM, but I'm also a small business owner, Witherspoon Marketing Group. And because I play 2 roles, and you've had a couple of significant roles as well, the one that you have now and the Secretary of Commerce, I was wondering what your outlook is for small businesses. You mentioned Siemens and Lucent, et cetera, how they're being impacted. What do you see as the future of what has been referred to as the micro enterprises or the general small businesses? How will they fare in the future with SBC particularly, and whatever other general comments you have in your opinion?
Well, I think in the food chain of business, obviously small businesses, which were in the 90s the growth engine of job creation, when during the 8 years of the Clinton administration, 21 million jobs were created in the private sector. The vast majority of those were created by small businesses, not large businesses. The truth of the matter is large business employment did not grow that much. But the food chain was able to be healthy, starting from the top of the large companies on the way down. We as a company are very proud of our support of small, minority, diverse businesses. We received from the Corporate Governance Board the Ron Brown Award for more diversity in our of suppliers than any company, major company in the U.S. And we're very proud of that. I think it was 25% of our purchases came from diverse companies, which we're very proud of. So I think companies have to make a commitment. They have to live up to it. It has to come from the top. Ed Whitaker has been that way as our chairman, demanding that. But I think in this economic time, difficulties, which I think will continue for at least the next year, the smaller businesses will continue to be pulled mightily by virtue of the difficulties that are going on in the large companies. And as I say, that food chain just, it kind of all flows downhill, and that's difficult.
Is that something that you see your peers discussing and cognizant of and considering, nevertheless?
I wish I could say yes, but the fact of the matter is, everybody's kind of worrying about their own thing. We're under stress. We will remain committed to making sure that those sort of numbers I just mentioned on diversity continue, and we continue to support smaller companies in our region that we serve. But that gets harder and harder to do as you get more stressed, starting at the top line revenue loss.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Manny?
Hi, Billy. Manny Sanchez, a humble lawyer from the city of Chicago.
Now, if you believe that, grab your wallet. Trust me, I know Manny. He's a great guy.
Hey, Billy, professionally and personally, how difficult, if at all, has it been for Bill Daley to transition from partner at big law firm in Chicago and then service in the public sector, both with NAFTA and Secretary of Commerce, and then transition to corporate president, professionally and personally in a different town, not Chicago, not Washington, D.C.,
Right.
but San Antonio, Texas?
Two things. One of the attractive things of this company and this industry is the connection of private-public partnership. As I mentioned in my speech, so much of our lives revolve around the policymakers, the commission, the people who have to regulate us, their challenges. So that intersection of public-private, and as I mentioned, not only take, for example, the Illinois commissioners, but every other commission are obligated not only to protect the consumers, but also protect the businesses. So they've got that same tug and pull, being the regulators and having to look out for the health of the companies in the industry and look out for the interests of the consumers. So that intersection of public-private partnership in this industry was an important attractiveness for me. It wasn't just going off to do something that some of the things I've been involved in. It hasn't been, the truth of the matter is, other than forgetting politics for a minute, other than the 4 years in Washington and 5 weeks in Florida, I've been in the private sector my whole life. So it wasn't as difficult as some people may think. San Antonio is a great city. It's very nice, terrific people. It's different than Chicago. But I get back here, and one of the attractiveness, obviously, is the fact that SBC also owns Ameritech, and so I'm able to get back and help, hopefully, with the problems of this company throughout the Midwest. It's been a lot of
Welcome
time.
back.
Thanks, Manny.
Billy.
I have an easy one for you. On the election, the Gore election, Bush election, as I understand it, the court ruled against you, and that's what kind of knocked Gore out of the box. And I think the issue was that the 2 or 3 counties that you wanted to count didn't count for the whole state. And a subsequent survey or repolling or analyzing the election, I think by the New York Times and the Journal and so on, many months later, showed that had you gone to the whole state, I think you would have won it. Query, why you as the campaign manager didn't you go to the whole state instead of just the 2 counties down below, which knocked you out, I think, by what, 500 votes out of 90 million cast, something like that?
God, why'd you have to go through that whole thing?
I don't know.
We decided that we wanted to pick out those counties where we knew right away from evidence on Election Day, and now, weeks later, all these other stories. But we wanted to file knowing exactly with evidence of what happened on Election Day so that no one could say they're just shotgunning, trying to throw the thing up for grabs, blow it up. Now, they said it anyways. But the truth is the decision was made not to willy-nilly run around and file in every county when we didn't have the evidence. We thought that was the appropriate thing to do. We knew we were dealing with enormous issues of global position of the United States, the reputation of the United States. I knew I was dealing with the reputation and had to protect the reputation of Al Gore as a vice president of the United States who was involved in something that no one wanted to be in uncharted waters, and I was not going to just do things, to throw a whole bunch of stuff up on the screen and hope something sticks. I mean, that to me would have been wrong to do. So we picked out those 4 counties. Now, weeks later, evidence came out of problems in other places. Those are the choices and challenges when you're in a position.
But didn't the Supreme Court rule that you had to have the whole state rather than just the 2 counties? Why wouldn't you have known that going in?
No, the Supreme Court didn't rule that.
Well, one of the courts did, didn't they?
Well, I don't know. It's the U.S. Supreme Court just said it's over, the end. Goodbye.
No, but didn't the state Supreme Court say that you had to go vote for the whole state?
No, if you remember, I don't know. I've tried not to think about this. The Monday after this, Al Gore went on TV and said he wanted a statewide recount if the governor at the time, the president, would agree to it. That offer was rejected. But then, everything began.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yeah, Doug.
Doug Whitley, President of the Illinois State Chamber of Commerce. I would like for you to talk about your perspective now being president of SBC, large multinational corporation, coming out of the Secretary of Commerce's office. Has your perspective changed at all about the institution of government and how, as a business leader, you get government to be responsive to markets and responsive to the sense of urgency that you deal with every day? While many of our politicians are quite willing to name everybody who's in the business world as being internized,
right,
that you're all crooks, that you have no regard or respect for citizens and workers, et cetera, Give me your perspective on that.
I mean, when you sit on the other side, when I was there at Commerce, you'd have people come in and whine or complain or whatever, you kind of roll your eyes and go, okay, I've heard this, and you're making X amount of dollars and your salary's this and yada, yada. The most frustrating thing, having been in government, is the difficulty of responding quickly. That is the challenge. Government is totally structured, and I don't care what government it is, the federal government, state government, city government, is basically structured not to respond in a quick way. Now, there's good, the other argument is, government shouldn't be changing policies every day and jumping around, and you set a policy and you move forward and you implement it. As in the telecom industry, as I tried to say, the difficulty of that is you have a dynamic, incredibly more dynamic, seemingly dynamic and changing economy with technology changes occurring, at least in our industry and many others, in an incredibly fast-paced way, and it's tough for the policymakers, not only the commissions, but the legislators, to, they're not going to revisit a telecom act every year, in spite of the fact that the industry may be changing like crazy every year. But it is, being in the outside now and in the private sector, I do think, number one, that you're right, that many people are jumping on the challenges of, and especially in our industry, and the actions taken by some that, you don't need more laws to tell people what they were doing, convince people what they were doing was wrong. I mean, it's just common sense that would tell you that. It is good values about how you conduct your business that you don't do those things. But these were all the stars of the 90s. I mean, the all due respect to our friends in the media, the financial media, I mean, these guys were all, and women that were in these businesses that were just booming in the 90s, they could do no wrong. And as I mentioned, the big bad bells were these plotting, boring, conservative, balance sheets. We're not out there letting it rip like others. We're not exactly viewed as the future. They were going to go by the way of whatever. I think today, and I think the business community today must stand up more and talk about their own sins. They don't do that. Everybody wants to run for cover. Part of the challenge for, I think, the business leaders of the future, they got to understand that they're in a public game, and they've got to respond in that game. If you want to be on CNBC and you want to be on Lou Dobbs' show, and that's good for your company and good for you as a leader, then you got to take the downside of that, and you better be out there to answer the questions when it goes the other way against you. And I think that's so. It works both ways, and I don't think the business people have appreciated that. I mean, Jack Welch, was a great CEO. Was the star of the 90s. Well, I mean, maybe not, depending over a long period, whether that's true or not. But you've got to be out there, and if you get the accolades, you got to take the other stuff too. Edna. Okay.
Are you willing to look at a crystal ball and tell us what the telecommunication industry is going to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? The problems, as you've spelled out, are enormous overcapacity and enormous cherry picking with competition that seems to be rampant but ties the hands of the universal suppliers. What is it going to look like? What should it look like in the future?
I can't predict it technology-wise. I mean, there are lots of things out there that otherwise and I'm sure there's many people who are much more technically proficient than I. So to guess whether everybody's going to be wireless or 802.11 or whatever the new technology is that is going to drive it, I think the consolidation is going to take place. If I was to say, and I think part of this whole debate of competition, as we've debated over the last number of years, has been about wireline, residential. You know, if you've got 70% of the market there, then you are basically a monopoly, and all of this other stuff you talk about is nuts. I think we have to look at the platform of communications and look at wireless, cable, email. I mean, all of this competes, satellite. All of these are forms of communicating that are out there. If I had to guess, I think there'll probably be 3 telephone companies, communication companies. All these will be national sort of companies. There'll probably be 3 or 4 wireless. There'll probably be 2, maybe 3 cable companies, probably 2 satellite, and then you'll have a number of regional companies or smaller companies in certain areas that'll have good businesses, but you'll basically end up with anywhere from 8 to 10 national companies competing in the space about what's called communications. I think that's what will happen. I think if that happens and you allow local regional companies to still compete, that's a healthy industry. That's an industry of not just telecommunications based upon the telephone, old world, but a communications platform and communications industry that is healthy, hopefully, competitive, consumers benefit, the companies benefit, but it's a struggle to get there, and we're going to need lots of changes in mindset, in my opinion.
Are you going to be one of the survivors?
Yeah, we strongly believe we'll be a survivor, but believe me, 6 months ago, and part of this, as the commissioners know who are here, 6 months ago the general belief was, the R-Box won. The Bells won. It's all over. The little CLECs are gone. Everybody else is gone. Yada, yada, yada. They won. Well, this drain, this cyclone, is sucking us all into it. And we're all in this turmoil. And we're nowhere near as healthy as we were a year ago. Now, lots of businesses can say that by the general economy. But we run our business, and we're getting beat up pretty good about our cash flow, these ads, you got lots of cash. Well, we're running our businesses in a conservative way right now. We're cutting capital. We got to keep up our service qualities, which we will do. We've had to lay off people. We're going to try to manage our way through a tough time so that when the light comes, we're a healthy company for our for our customers, for our employees, and for our shareholders, and we can be long-term. We're not going to continue to spend at the levels we have and put this company in jeopardy if our revenue is going like that. You just can't run a business. You shouldn't run, and a lot of people do, but you shouldn't run a business that way. And we won't. We'll take our bangs for that, but we'll try to take our cash flow, pay down our debt in a tough time, and manage our way through this. And hopefully we'll be definitely one of the survivors in that new world. Thank you very much.